Hey everybody, today we have a very special guest, writer-director Cory Finley. His new film, Thoroughbreds, is coming out this Friday. It's a really cool movie, and he was nice enough to stop by and talk about some of the influences that went into making this film, which is basically The Shining meets Heathers. So, that's cool. Thanks for being here, man. Really appreciate it. And congratulations on the film. It's really good.
Thank you.
I like it a lot. So, Thoroughbreds comes out this Friday. Tell us a little bit about it.
Sure. So Thoroughbreds is kind of a psychological thriller with dark comedy elements. And it's the story of two teenage girls in suburban Connecticut who have a very complicated and manipulative friendship through which they kind of push and pull one another into a murder plot.
As you do.
As any good friendship does. Yeah.
Right. I was really excited to hear you say that The Shining was a source of inspiration. Yeah. So, just in general, like, what is it about a film about a haunted hotel that translates to a movie about girls plotting to murder in Connecticut?
Yeah. I love everything about The Shining, and I mean, this is true of all of Kubrick's movies, but particularly that one just creates such a kind of a unique, airtight world, and the whole movie just seems to be operating by its own rules. And I feel like as you see it additional times, you start to sort of comprehend its own logic a little bit more. It was an inspiration for us mostly through its use of camera movement. My movie Thoroughbreds started as a play, a stage play, and one of my key objectives in adapting it for the screen was that it not feel like a filmed play. And so whenever I was talking to anyone about sort of the way we'd shoot it, particularly Lyle Vincent, the cinematographer, we would talk about The Shining, and we'd talk about how that movie is very contained, and it's in some senses a one house movie. As we were location scouting for our house, we found a bunch that were nice, that were sort of big, classy mansions, but I kept saying they were not overlook enough. You know, we needed something a little more menacing, and with longer, creepier, twistier hallways.
Yeah. So, super iconic shot from The Shining. Everybody and Danny trucking around the hallways.
The amazing sound of the wheels.
Yeah. So just shots like this that you really live in a space like you were talking about, and you're going around the entire thing. What's the goal with a shot like that?
Well, I think you definitely bring the audience into the space, and there's such a strong sort of introduction to a space. And I think there's something on almost like just a deep neurological level about moving with a character that sort of puts you in their shoes. There's something I love too about like follow shots, about moving closely with the character but being on their back, where you're kind of seeing what they're seeing, but your view of their point of view is obstructed by the character themselves. There's a weird mix of bringing you closer to the character and sort of distancing you from the character.
Also, tonally, in terms of setting up the feel of an entire movie. Mm-hmm. Putting a shot like this, where you wander around the space in a fairly innocuous way, towards the beginning of the movie, like, what does that do for you in terms of setting up how you're planning on shooting the rest of the film? And like,
well, it certainly sets a certain pace. Your first 20 minutes, 30 minutes of a movie are partly about like teaching an audience how to watch the movie. Right. And certainly there's going to be a lot of sort of slow moving shots through the house, through the hotel, later in the movie, so you're setting those up here. There's something a little bit ominous about it. I think it's it's sort of brightly daylit, but it's not ominous on the surface of it, but just the sort of sustained flow of it. The camera feels a little bit like a presence rather than just like, a series of positions.
Mr. Ullman?
Yes?
I'm Jack Torrance.
Oh, well, come on in.
In Thoroughbreds, because Thoroughbreds is a fairly bright film, a lot of it takes place in the daytime. Using the daylight, also with some sort of ominous camera movement, it looks safe, but it's really not.
Certainly, like, I'm always looking for sources of tension. We sort of consciously tried to put some of the scenes where characters are kind of discussing more horrific events in brighter daylight. And certainly if you're shooting in brighter daylight, you can kind of get away with more ominous choices as far as camera placement and movement and that sort of thing without feeling self-parodic. I think anytime you're doing a movie with a scene with a very intense tone, you always risk almost mocking yourself.
What I like about this is just the big opulence of this room and how giant and then like balanced the composition is. And it reminded me a lot of how you framed particularly some of the conversations in Thoroughbreds. There's a lot of stuff that was very balanced in the center of the frame.
Some of that is just in such a simple, basic way, like the way that I like eating peanut butter or the way that I like sunlight on a beach. There's just something like deeply satisfying about symmetrical compositions. Particularly like the slow push through a doorway is just like fundamentally a beautiful shot in almost any context. Sort of opening into a room within the frame. It just looks beautiful. I love just what a kind of tiny presence he is in the frame, and also the fact that his back is to us. Sort of like we were talking about before. He's very central in the frame, so he has that sort of special emphasis, but he's also dwarfed by the house, and he's also mysterious in that he's turned away.
What do you want to talk about?
This is the all work and no play scene. And the music in this scene, it's sort of arrhythmic. Noise is not the right word, obviously, because it's very meticulously placed, but you get the feeling of it's so scattered and so arrhythmic. Yeah. Like, what does the music in this scene do for you?
Right. I think of it as texture more than melody, and I love when film music can do that. They're using some sort of extended technique, as they call it, on the violins. I don't know if it's sort of plucking or doing something funny with the strings. And I think the human ear can almost pick up when an instrument is being played in a way other than it's intended to be played.
Our caveman brains are like, no, you're doing that wrong.
You're doing it wrong, yeah. It's so wrong. It's got this sort of wonderful like fingernails on a chalkboard quality. And we had an amazing composer, Eric Friedlander. He did a lot of similar, different sort of extended techniques with his cello.
It felt very uncomfortable in the right kind of way, I think. But.
Totally. And I love, like, particularly when you have a very composed visual style in a scene, I think that kind of gives you more room to do something rougher around the edges musically. We can all think of movies that are just like a little bit too perfect, where it's there's like some sort of a nice Baroque, lovely score, and there's these very sort of dollhousey composed images. And then I think there are also movies out there with, sort of wild, crazy handheld camera work and crazy atonal music. And I think the stuff that hits my sweet spot is sort of constantly a mix of that sort of chaos and control.
I think we should discuss Danny. I think we should discuss what should be done.
So moving on to another film that you pulled from, Heathers, from the late 80s, Christian Slater, Winona Ryder.
Yeah.
What about that film do you like?
That was a movie that, it wasn't, when I was making the movie, a super conscious influence, but I'd seen it when I was young, and it had had a really big effect on me. And I think it was only after I'd fully finished Thoroughbreds and kept getting that comparison that I realized how deeply it had kind of wormed its way in my subconscious.
I'll go watch it again.
I do think it's a very different movie, but I think it's just an amazingly bold, sort of wild, crazy movie. When I watched it again recently, I was struck by just the use of color in it. It's got this totally wild, kind of extreme color palette, and yes, this sort of surrealism of some of the images.
Heather Chandler is one bitch that deserves to die.
Killing her won't solve anything. I say we just grow up, be adults, and die.
I was freed to be bold by my memories of Heathers, because I think it is such a sort of pulling out all the stops sort of movie. Oddly, in the same way that The Shining does, sort of creates its own alternate reality. It shares certain qualities with like a John Hughes movie or something, but it is, as far as just the rules by which the characters operate, it is so completely its own strange thing. And I think I remember reading somewhere also that the screenwriter of Heathers had initially wanted Stanley Kubrick to direct it.
I found that today. I was reading up on Heathers, and I saw that little nugget. That was his first choice was Stanley Kubrick. Apparently, it was going to be like a 3-hour movie to begin with, and that was part of the thinking. Is like Kubrick's got enough cachet, he could do a 3-hour movie.
Yeah, I love the idea of the 3-hour teen murder comedy.
It's like the one thing he didn't do.
Yeah,
You know?
it is the one thing he didn't
Yeah.
do. Yeah, history is sad not to have that movie, but the non-Kubrick Heathers turned out beautiful.
Right. Yes, it did. Well, man, thanks for stopping by.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it. Thoroughbreds is great.
Thank you so much. This was a lot of fun. Really
Full stop.
appreciate it. Good.